So, welcome everybody, a very warm welcome to everybody. I'm Penny Roberts, I'm President of the Society for the Study of French History, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 13th annual Douglas Johnson Lecture, which is co-organised between the Society for the Study of French History and the Association for the Study of Modern and Contemporary France. We want to particularly extend a thanks to the Institut français as well for hosting us for the first time in 3 years, face-to-face as well. The last couple of years we've had to do the lectures online, which has been a good experience in many ways for expanding our audience, but it's always nice to see people face-to-face, and we're doing a sort of hybrid tonight, both of in-person and online. Douglas Johnson was the first president of the Association for the Society for the Study of Association for the Study of Modern and Contemporary France. I'll get it right. And also was very closely involved with the Society for the Study of French History. So it's only fitting that we should join together to sort of celebrate his legacy as a leading Francophile and his long career at UCL as well, but also originally, in fact, the University of Birmingham, which also connects into my history and also of our speaker this evening, Chris Tinker, but more of that anon. I also got the great pleasure of announcing the award of our undergraduate dissertation prize. I believe our recipient is here this evening, Beatrice Barr. I'd like her to come up and receive our congratulations. I believe you've already had the reward, as it were, but it's nice to, this was for her dissertation on revolutionaries, feminists, martyrs, rewriting the image of the religieuse hospitalière in pre-revolutionary France. Also, her dissertation is available on our website, and also there's a live blog post where she talks and gives a summary of it as well, which I believe has recently been released. So, Beatrice, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So that's excellent, of course. I mean, it's very important for both our societies, all the work we do with early career scholars and encouraging work in French history and in French studies more broadly. So that brings me on to introducing our speaker this evening, Professor Chris Tinker from the University of Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh. And I'm sure that his work will be familiar to many of you in the area of media, of cultural studies, of pop music, in particular think Serge Gainsbourg and Jacques Brel, as I often do. He will be speaking this evening on À la vie, à la mort, media representations of posthumous celebrity in France and the UK. Chris, thank you.
Many thanks, Penny, and congratulations again to Beatrice as well. Good evening, everybody. Bonne année, and Happy New Year to you. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time during the busy start to the year to attend this lecture and to support the work of the SSFH and the ASMCF. It's an honour to have been invited to present this year's Douglas Johnson Memorial Lecture and return to the Institut français and go online too. And thanks in particular to Andrew Smith and to Claire Eldridge for all their work in organising this first joint event of the year. And we're already looking forward to our next joint event in March, which will be the Postgraduate Study Day. Tonight's lecture has given me an opportunity to bring together findings from a series of research projects relating to one particular strand of my research, media representations of posthumous celebrity. Posthumous celebrity and celebrity deaths in particular are a regular feature of mass and social media coverage. Certain examples of celebrity deaths are more prominent in the media coverage or in media coverage than others, which I imagine we're aware of from our own media interactions. The quantity, duration, and intensity of coverage after and potentially before a particular death can also vary. Individuals might recall where they were when they heard about a particular death. Notable examples often cited include John F. Kennedy and Diana, Princess of Wales. And indeed, I should mention that this year, news of the death of Queen Elizabeth broke in the media on the 8th of September, just as our own ASMCF annual conference was coming to a close. So a celebrity death may or may not resonate also with an individual for a variety of reasons. Thinking more specifically about the French context, one particular example of mediatized celebrity deaths that springs to mind, given my own experience of living in France in the pre-internet days of the early 90s, the passing of the singer-songwriter Serge Gainsbourg in 1991. And what struck me there at the time as a 21-year-old was the level of media coverage and public mourning, as well as Gainsbourg's appeal to younger audiences like myself at the time. And there'll be more on Gainsbourg later. The representation of posthumous celebrity in the media is now a well-established field of academic inquiry, comprising several functions. For Kath Davis, writing about the pop star Michael Jackson, such media coverage acts as an effective summation of the construction of the star persona when alive, whilst also signalling the development of a posthumous media image. This combination of life and death is effectively encapsulated in the French expression à la vie, à la mort, to life, to death, which I used in the title of my talk, and indeed is used in the title of one of Johnny Halliday's double albums from 2002, more on Hallyday later on. And à la vie, à la mort also can mean, more generally, it can have other meanings such as forever, pour toujours, ou jusqu'à la mort. Posthumous celebrity also emphasizes the production of new meaning. The generation of posthumous meaning is indeed endless. James Bennett and Sean Redmond, following Lisa Bode, describe celebrity in its study as an ongoing living process. Jolly Jensen views the study of posthumous celebrity as a particularly complex, multifaceted process, a democratized participation in reading the present and the past, in finding commonality, in exploring anonymity and fame, in connecting across time and space, race, class and ethnicity, and, all along, recognizing the constructedness of the interpretative process. And as I suggested then in my opening comments, certain discourses of posthumous celebrity are stronger than others, which are neglected, forgotten, or repressed. And indeed, as Jensen observes, posthumous reputation is clearly a contested process, one that's continually being negotiated with and against mass mediation. Fans, families, and journalists also have distinct roles in the production of posthumous celebrity, according to Jensen. So, following on from an earlier academic interest in celebrity and stardom, as I mentioned, I've been developing an interest in posthumous celebrity, which so far has focused on 4 particular figures within French popular culture. Coluche, the comic, actor and humanitarian, Johnny Hallyday and Dalida, both singers and actors, and finally Serge Gainsbourg, the singer-songwriter, actor, writer and filmmaker. In the cases of Coluche, Dalida and Hallyday, there I've focused on French media coverage. Whereas in the case of Gainsbourg, I've looked at his representations in the British press, which I think seems fitting for tonight's lecture given Douglas Johnson's own interests in Franco-British relations. I'll say a few words then about each figure before sharing some findings from our research, and I'll try and give an example or two for each point, translating some French terms into English. While posthumous reputation is often contested, and conflict represents a well-established news value, my work has also identified areas of consensus in coverage. So, to start with Coluche, the comic actor and humanitarian Coluche represents a particularly prominent and enduring example of posthumous celebrity within contemporary French popular culture. In 1985, just a few months before his tragic death in a motorcycle accident, Coluche launched the Restos du Cœur, the Restaurants of the Heart, initially as a food distribution charity, calling upon the singer-songwriter Jean-Jacques Goldman to write and release a charity single, La Chanson des Restos. 3 years later, in 1989, 6 well-established figures of French popular music scene, known as Les Enfoirés, named after one of Coluche's comic insults or catchwords. A literal translation would be something like tossers or assholes. They embarked on a tour to raise money for the charity. And since 1992, the televised Enfoiré concert has taken place annually, featuring a large number of performers, accompanied by CD and DVD releases and downloads, and backed by extensive media coverage, which contributes towards maintaining Coluche's profile in France. While accounts of his posthumous image were lacking when I carried out the research, which has now been was published in 2019 in Modern and Contemporary France, press reviews of the various television documentaries devoted to Coluche produced since his death highlight several even desirable qualities of media coverage, such as completeness, a richness of reflection, a balance between tribute and criticism, and a questioning of hagiographical approaches. Mass media coverage of Coluche mobilizes a series of competing discourses. First of all, then, with Coluche as an object of nostalgia. Coverage expresses a sense of loss for Coluche, or what Fred Davis refers to as first order or simple nostalgia, which harbours the largely unexamined belief that things were better, more beautiful, healthier, happier, more civilized, more exciting then than now. And in 2006, a lengthy article in the news magazine Nouvel Observateur, En quoi Coluche manque à la France, how France misses Coluche, draws negative comparisons between Coluche and today's generation of comics who are found wanting or unable to match his various qualities: ferocity, humour, charisma, fearlessness, cheekiness, speed and intelligence, as well as his ability to comment on contemporary life, recognise and solve problems, build consensus and unite people. Certain commentaries in the Nouvel Observateur article challenge such simple nostalgia, and this then corresponds to Davis's second order or reflexive nostalgia, whereby the individual raises questions concerning the truth, accuracy, completeness, or representativeness of the nostalgic claim. So, for example, while the actor and comic Cad views Coluche as worthy of recognition, he prefers to focus on new and current generations of comics, for example. In addition to simple and reflexive forms of nostalgia, the same article features what Davis terms third order or interpreted nostalgia, which moves beyond issues of historical accuracy or felicity of the nostalgic claim on the past, and even as the reaction unfolds, questions and potentially at least renders problematic the very reaction itself. So, for instance, Coluche's former wife, Véronique Colucci, highlights the futility of speculating how Coluche would have reacted to present-day situations. And the actor Romain Bouteille resists a process of canonization, which serves as a distraction from more important matters. Television coverage also focuses on accusations of vulgarity in Coluche's work. A 2016 documentary on France 3 cites, for example, a 1985 opinion poll which revealed that while 55% of the public found Coluche nice, sympathique, 70% indeed found him vulgar. However, the same documentary also questions or refutes accusations of vulgarity, defining the term vulgarity as a form of obscenity and indecency or shamelessness. The journalist and humorist Didier Porte considers Coluche's material in contrast as, and I quote, reinvigorating and of genuine quality. Accusations of racism in Coluche's work are also raised and challenged in television coverage. A 2016 documentary on Arte features Coluche's own direct denial, while several media accounts serve to challenge charges of racism. An article, 2016 article in the Est Républicain newspaper asks explicitly whether some of Coluche's comments and aphorisms would be acceptable today to individuals or associations seeking to combat racism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. Sorry. So, The 2008 biopic, Coluche Histoire d'un mec, Coluche Story of a Bloke, provides a further pretext for differences of opinion concerning Coluche's reputation. Certain critics and commentaries regret the film's deliberately partial vision. In response to the criticisms, the director Antoine de Caunes develops a complex account of the film and, I quote, arguing that his film was neither a hagiography nor a destabilizing project, but an independent film that he made with the wish that people like Coluche even more after watching it. While media coverage generates competing discourses around Coluche, more fixed and consensual accounts appear, firstly relating to his star status, both as star as special and star as ordinary, to use Richard Dyer's terms. Posthumous media coverage of Coluche highlights his ordinary, unremarkable, if not at times difficult, upbringing in Montrouge in the southern Parisian suburbs, identified as his hometown. The association between Coluche and Montrouge has been maintained in reports, for example, on the unveiling in 2011 of a statue there with his characteristic dungarees cast in bronze. In contrast with such representations of ordinary beginnings, posthumous media coverage also represents Coluche in hagiographical terms as a distinct, special, extraordinary star. For example, in TV coverage via repeated reference to the heavily mediatized public outpouring of grief following his death, which repeatedly includes the poignant line that the economist, senior civil servant and advisor to President Mitterrand, Jacques Attali, delivered during the funeral service. Salut ma poule, goodbye my darling. Television coverage represents Coluche as what Dyer terms a politically conscious rebel. A 2016 article in Marianne news magazine expresses thanks to Coluche on the 30th anniversary of his death, while a list of Coluche's aphorisms under various headings such as governance, demonstrations and trade unions, racism and immigration, political scandals, are deemed to be still relevant today. Coverage also situates Coluche in terms of relatively open and playful attitudes towards gender and sexuality in France. Repeated references made to the mock wedding ceremony in 1985 involving Coluche dressed as the bride and Thierry Leluron as a groom, surrounded by drag queens. And I should mention that Thierry Leluron, just in case you don't know him, is a comedian and impressionist. And as I said, was part of this mock wedding ceremony, and taking place just 3 days before the wedding of the famous newscaster Yves Mourouzi to fellow journalist Véronique Audemars d'Alençon. The mock wedding has also been interpreted as a criticism of the over-mediatization of the celebrity wedding and this celebrity wedding, and also in coverage as an allusion to Mourouzi's homosexuality, which was not publicly disclosed at the time. Press coverage associates Coluche with social solidarity more generally via his personal passion for motorcycling, riding skills and his collection of vehicles. While such coverage corresponds with well-established stereotypes of rich and famous male stars indulging in expensive, adventurous and potentially dangerous leisure pursuits, the male camaraderie with fellow bikers and personal friendships that Coluche developed through motorcycling are also emphasized, notably through recollections of the group of bikers who acted as pallbearers at his funeral. The association between Coluche and motorbiking takes on a further social, charitable and humanitarian dimension in newspaper coverage of bike runs organised by various motorcycle groups in France in support of the Restos du Cœur charity. The posthumous profile of Coluche is both raised and shaped in press coverage by his association with other well-known individuals who've attained distinction in France and then internationally within their respective fields. Press coverage highlights Coluche's fifth position, below Charles de Gaulle, Louis Pasteur, l'Abbé Pierre and Marie Curie in a 2005 opinion poll listing the 100 most distinguished French figures. Coluche is also compared with other French figures in a variety of local contexts, also via comparisons with canonical French authors and their work, with non-French public figures such as the Italian comedian, actor and political activist and former leader of the Five Star movement, Beppe Grillo, who is dubbed the Italian Coluche. Press coverage identifies Coluche as a popular subject and source of inspiration for various Coluche lookalikes, impersonators, tribute artists known as Suzy. Various similarities or resemblance between Coluche and the Suzy are identified from facial and bodily appearance to clothing, behavior and mannerisms. Finally, Coluche is identified as a source of inspiration for the film biopic Coluche, l'histoire d'un mec. Playing Coluche is said to have allowed François-Xavier de Maison to learn more about Coluche, but also to awaken and develop certain personal qualities such as, I quote, his insolence and his rebellious side. So moving on then to Hallyday. The death of Johnny Hallyday in December 2017 represents a significant moment in the development of popular culture and posthumous celebrity in France, particularly given the music star and actor's enduring and prominent media profile stretching back to the 1960s. David loosely views Halliday's cultural status in death in terms of the long-standing polarity in French cultural discourse between universalism and particularism. So, whereas Voltaire or Proust, Piaf or Gainsbourg can easily be depicted as universalizing French culture by taking out into the Anglophone world and beyond, Halliday clearly cannot. When Piaf returned from the Americas in the 1940s, her Frenchness in the eyes of the French themselves was intensified by her having conquered the world. Johnny's Frenchness, on the other hand, is intensified by his failure to do so. The Johnny phenomenon is represented as a cosily stay-at-home national particularism. Moreover, loosely argues that Emmanuel Macron and other public voices loiter in the liminal territory between universalism and particularism by playing on the legitimate contention that pop and rock, American in origin but skillfully Gallicized by Johnny, have become France's shared mainstream culture, and that the hyperbolic outpourings of grief following his death serve to demonstrate that thanks to Johnny and rock and roll, the snootily intellectual high cultural France is a thing of the past. And that the ultimate purpose of insisting that the French all have in themselves something of Johnny, quelque chose de Johnny, a reference to Halliday's hit about Tennessee Williams, is to signify that for all their naive passion for a fictional America, they are still themselves still singularly French. So in my own study of initial French coverage in the 2 weeks following the death of Johnny Hallyday, and that was recently published in Celebrity Studies in a special issue on death and celebrity edited by Charlotte Boyce and Daniel Dove, a broad consensus seemed to be generated around Halliday's persona. A strong collective sense of loss is expressed as France is said to be in mourning. The personal loss experienced by individuals is also highlighted. Close family members, personal friends, professional collaborators, members of the general public, fans and even superfans is conveyed. Halliday's mythical status is represented in quantitative and qualitative terms. Accounts provide statistics emphasizing the extent of his creative output and commercial success, as well as a stereotypically lavish star lifestyle. His powerful, larger-than-life, spectacular performances are emphasized. He's referred to as a giant, a showman, the god of the stadiums, the master of grand entrances, a monument, and the list goes on, deserving a place in the pantheon of artists. On occasion, coverage is less hagiographical, and there are indications that he could represent a divisive figure where music and cultural tastes are concerned. Coverage of Halliday's mythical status strongly emphasizes his French identity. He's referred to as a French passion, a French idol, a French myth, a national treasure, part of his work, part of the national music heritage. Extensive references made to a message of tribute, Merci Johnny, projected onto the Eiffel Tower, the quintessential symbol of Paris and France, which you will have seen hopefully you've seen on the poster, which Andrew kindly designed. Prominent political figures represent Hallyday as a signifier of national unity with whom individuals can identify. As we hear from David Loosley, the president of the Fifth Republic, Macron describes Hallyday in such terms in statements before and during Halliday's popular or people's tribute, an hommage populaire. Halliday's death is, however, also associated in coverage with more negative and problematic views of French identity. In one example, in Le Figaro, his death represents the idea of France as a pale imitation of the USA. Beyond specific concerns of French national identity, coverage identifies Hallyday as a force for social unity and cohesion, transcending differences of social class, generation and political divisions. And following his death, he is reported to have received a standing ovation in the National Assembly. However, he's also described as political despite himself and is more actively identified with the political right. In one example, referred to as, and I quote, the man who dined with Sarkozy, Chirac and Giscard. Coverage also emphasises Halliday's personal impact on local French communities and individuals via accounts of particular visits, concerts, performances and events on specific dates, and even including those that were actually cancelled, so events that Hallyday didn't actually perform at. These are part of the coverage. Beyond France and the French-speaking world, Halliday's international, professional and personal links and affinities with US popular culture are emphasised, along with his family life in California. More generally, Halliday's international reputation and stature are underlined through positive evaluations of non-French commentators. So, for example, the headline, Tom Hanks, Johnny Hallyday deserved to be nicknamed the French Elvis Presley. Halliday's value as an object of interest and inquiry within the intellectual and academic world is also confirmed in press coverage, particularly via his association in the early to mid-60s, initially with rock and roll, and then with later with yay pop music, and with the baby boomer generation. Halliday's own personal qualities at times form an area of general consensus. Coverage maintains long-standing traditional masculine representations of Hallyday as a physically attractive and adventurous male, a strong association between Hallyday and the French sporting world, particularly football, is emphasised. Hallyday, like Coluche, is also associated with biker culture, and the presence of bikers at his funeral cortege is emphasised in coverage. Consensus is also drawn around the spiritual and religious dimension of Halliday's character. On occasion, coverage identifies Hallyday in spiritual terms rather than French Republic secularism, particularly with the Christian faith and Catholicism more generally. Coverage highlights Halliday's positive personal attributes, including an immense understanding of others, for example, immense simplicity. Other accounts point towards a darker and self-destructive side of his personality. Occasional less favourable evaluations include accounts of working relationships, and references also made to what is regarded as a mixed career as a film actor. Finally, press coverage highlights Halliday's strength of character and stoicism, giving a challenging, dignified struggle with cancer. Halliday's illness is at times recounted in his own words: his initial decision to keep his illness private, his later decision to go public, while de-dramatising and universalising his experience, and his expressed desire to live and work as long as possible, continuing to perform and record. Initial posthumous press coverage includes reference to tributes taking various tangible and intangible forms: music concerts, performances by local tribute acts, the kind of sosie that I've already mentioned, Johnny Guitar, for example, Johnny Junior, and others. Conflicting views focus on the scale of Halliday's popular or people's tribute that he received. The hommage populaire, which is said to have involved more than 500,000 people and watched by a fifth of the French population, generated swathes of media coverage. And the event is also compared with the funeral cortege of Victor Hugo in 1885, with around 2 million mourners. On occasion, the scale is questioned in coverage of Halliday's hommage populaire. Initial posthumous press coverage also generates competing discourses concerning the form of any anticipated collective tribute. Romain Barreux in the Parisien newspaper describes the main features of the well-established format of the state tribute, the hommage national. And I quote, held at the Invalides or the Panthéon, the national tribute must be announced in the Journal officiel, the official bulletin of the French Republic, providing details of laws and official announcements. The president pays tribute to the deceased, whose coffin is decorated with a red, white and blue flag, in a speech. In the event, Hallyday received, as I mentioned, an hommage populaire, while the novelist Jean d'Ormesson, who died the night before Hallyday, was the subject of a hommage national, a state tribute. So President Macron is said to have opted for a popular tribute organised jointly by the French presidency, Halliday's family and his close friends, rather than an hommage national reserved for state representatives. Conflicting discourses in French coverage also concerned Halliday's site of burial and final resting place on the island of Saint-Barthélemy. For example, for the singer Michel Polnareff, it's strange to take Johnny's physical body away from his audience. Coverage includes several references to, as well as discussion and debate around the naming of places, buildings and monuments in France after Hallyday. In Paris, the metro station du Roc was renamed for a period du Roc Johnny, reflecting Halliday's association with rock music. Halliday's posthumous commodification and commercialization and the development of a lucrative business in Hallyday memorabilia are also the subject of discussion. Sales of Halliday's singles and albums are said to have rocketed. However, for example, there is in Paris Normandie, the newspaper, there's a particular focus on independent record shop owners and their desire not to profit from his death. And finally, initial press coverage features mixed views on Halliday's posthumous media coverage. Certain examples of coverage question or reject the media hype, the potential negative effect of Halliday's TV tribute on the annual French televised charity event, the Telethon, le Téléthon, and taking place during the same weekend is broached in coverage. But the two televised events are also later identified as mutually productive. So moving then on to our next posthumous celebrity leader, who I've been looking at specifically as a gay icon in a study comparing her contemporary press coverage in the last decade with that of the living pop star and gay icon Mylène Farmer. I've been contributing to a project on queer realms of memory led by Dennis Provencher, Sian Bouhamer and Ryan Schroth. Dalida was born to Italian parents and raised in Egypt before moving to Paris to develop a singing career in the mid-50s. Barbara Lebrun's excellent 2020 book-length study of Dalida highlights the key moments in her development as a singer-performer, from her early exoticism and Mediterranean, particularly Italian, and Latino Caribbean influences, her association in the mid to early 60s with a relatively safe rock-a-bon genre, the melodramatic songs and performances of the mid-60s, and given her own attempt to take her own life in 1967 and her eventual suicide in 1987. Her relationship with the Middle East and North Africa, including songs in Hebrew in the early to mid-60s, and her popularization in France of songs in Arabic from the late 70s, as well as her engagement with 1970s French disco. So the concept of the gay icon is well established in contemporary French media discourse. The question of what makes a potential gay icon has also formed the subject of both academic and wider public debates. While considering the term, and I quote, has been dreadfully overused lately, Georges-Claude Guilbert provides extensive discussion of the gay icon in his 2018 book, focusing on, and I quote, the mostly female entertainers gay men love. For Guilbert, the gay icon tends to be heterosexual. Sometimes she's a fighter, sometimes a long-suffering victim. In any case, she's a strong personality who often ends tragically. Coverage of Dalida effectively reuses and perpetuates well-established myths of female gay icons as glamorous, including association with a French transformiste or cross-dressing cabaret tradition. Dalida is identified as a particular inspiration and popular subject for drag queens. While Michou, a French singer and drag artist and the owner of Chez Michou in Montmartre, is identified as a key reference point both during his lifetime and following his death in 2020. Coverage of Dalida also emphasizes the combination of glamour and psychological difficulties. On this website Toute la Couture, Solimpier includes Dalida in a list of, and I quote, tragic icons characterized by personal setbacks, a tragic destiny, a world weariness which speaks to audience members who feel at odds with their own society. While media representations contribute towards drawing consensus around the notion of the gay icon, other examples of coverage generate tension or conflict. Media coverage situates both Dalida within a broader genealogy of gay icons in the world of entertainment. She's compared, for example, by the fashion writer Alice Pfeiffer in Express magazine to the Italian singer Raffaele Carrà. In contrast, certain examples of coverage actively represent or resist the very term icon gay or gay icon as narrow and limiting, instead highlighting the breadth of artists' audience appeal. Dalida, in common with other gay icons, as highlighted by Gilbert, is associated in coverage with LGBTQ+ advocacy and activism, and more specifically her support for gay pride in France, the community radio station Radio Fréquence Gay, and awareness raising and research into HIV and AIDS, while attention is also drawn to the gay men in Dalida's personal and professional entourage. Coverage of Dalida also represents and questions essentialist assumptions linking sexual orientation to cultural and music tastes. So a 2016 report in Rue 89 discussing scientific research seeking to establish common characteristics of same-sex desiring individuals takes enjoying Dalida's music as a given, for example. And finally, a site of consensus and conflict, the gay icon is also represented in everyday, personalized and more open-ended terms. In a France Inter radio interview with the Moroccan writer Abdel Taye on the publication of his novel La Vie Lente in 2019. And an interview that stresses the fundamental importance of same-sex desire to his sense of self. Taye describes his own and his sister's youthful admiration for Dalida, given, for example, her successful career in France, her integrity, retaining her accent and her arabité, her Arabness, her expressive qualities, melodrama, tears and tragedy in song performance such as Histoire d'un amour, her repetitive use of words which reminds Taye of his mother, and Dalida's capacity to reflect Taye's own truth. And the depth of meaning that Taye found in Dalida and her tragic end, which contrasts with the limited, perhaps popular, the popular light-hearted folklore surrounding her in France that emphasizes her gestural expression and her association with disco music. And so on to my final posthumous celebrity, Serge Gainsbourg. And here are some of the findings I presented at a conference on Gainsbourg in 2018 in Paris. And here the focus is on UK press coverage. So, and following that conference, there's a further contribution to a forthcoming book edited by Olivier Julien and Olivier Bourderionnais on Gainsbourg. Gainsbourg is relatively well known in the Anglophone world, musically and lyrically innovative as an artist, as well as a controversial media figure. Coverage attributes to Gainsbourg and his work specific personal qualities, both desirable and otherwise, or a mixture of both. Positive assessments view him as a progressive figure, multi-talented, a stylish or style icon, a romantic icon, charismatic, associated with the spirit of '68, the avant-garde. More negatively, represented in base terms such as boorish, ugly as a young man, oversexed, sex-obsessed, a drunken sex spot, dirty old man. And the use of somewhat dated terms such as dirty old man, which Seems rather reminiscent of the BBC comedy Steptoe and Son, for example, and terms like sexpot shows then a reliance on a somewhat cliched language and traditional norms relating to male heterosexuality. Gainsbourg's music is viewed for the most part positively, at times in sophisticated, complex terms. We're told that he's regarded as a French cultural titan, described following his death by the then President François Mitterrand as our Baudelaire, our Apollinaire, regarded as an exemplar in terms of versification and rhythm patterns. And such is the potential of Gainsbourg as a positive symbol of European belonging that in Ewan McColmin, the Scotsman, effectively identifies him as a seemingly trivial but nonetheless valid reason for voting Remain in the 2016 UK Brexit referendum. Coverage also generates a positive view of Gainsbourg's status and influence, both in French and wider international contexts. French press coverage locates Gainsbourg firmly within a broad French chanson tradition with references to Aznavour, Legrand, Brel, Piaf, Trenet, and the list goes on. Also reference to UK-based Anglophone and Francophone popular music artists who cover his songs. For example, the Belgian singer Gabriel Ducomble and Mustard and Blood, as well as to Gainsbourg's influence on and similarities with current and new generations of Anglophone artists and their own output, including Arctic Monkeys, Beck, Jarvis Cocker, the DJ duo Disco Smack, Gaz Coombs, and the list again goes on. Less positive. On occasion, then, perhaps his music is represented perhaps less positively, for example, as part of a view sometimes regarding a cliched view of French popular music in general that's been maintained. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, Je t'aime moi non plus, specifically the 1969 version featuring Gainsbourg and Birkin, including the controversy that surrounded its release in the UK, features repeatedly in coverage. The song is often referred to in rather dated tabloid language, which emphasises the aforementioned long-held cheeky stereotypes of British Anglo-Saxon embarrassment where the subject of sex is concerned. So words like saucy, salacious, steamy, steamily cheesy. And in certain examples of British coverage, the song is not to be taken seriously and is identified as a suitable subject for parody. A comedy version of the song Je t'aime, allo allo, from 1986 by the characters René and Yvette from the BBC comedy Allo Allo, along with a further spoof version by the comic actors June Whitfield and Frankie Howard even, are mentioned repeatedly. In addition, certain accounts challenge the supposed eroticism of the song. Whereas in contrast, Craig McLean in 2018 recognised a subjective and varied response to the song. Gainsbourg wrote the sexiest or sleaziest, depending on your view, song ever, Je t'aime moi non plus. Beyond Je t'aime moi non plus and its affirmation of heterosexual identities, press coverage on occasion articulates gay or queer alternatives within Gainsbourg's musical repertoire. So one example, Claire Sawyers in The Times describes how Piaf's hit Mon Légionnaire went on to be a gay disco anthem in the 80s after Serge Gainsbourg recorded it and added new connotations. And the final area of discord in UK press coverage concerns Gainsbourg's supposed status as a cultural link between France and the UK. He's reviewed, for example, in coverage of Jane Birkin's 27 symphonic Gainsbourg tribute concert at the Barbican in London. As a cultural link. In one particular article, however, the Franco-British divide is viewed as too great a challenge for Gainsbourg. For Clive Davis, writing in The Times, Gainsbourg would have effectively enjoyed greater popularity in the English-speaking world if he'd performed songs in English, given a perceived resistance on the part of English-speaking audiences to non-Anglophone songs. Where more consensual coverage is concerned, Press coverage repeatedly reinforces the dynamics of Gainsbourg's relationship with his long-term partner, Jane Birkin, from their initial meeting, reportedly difficult start, onto their life together and their family, and to Gainsbourg's death and beyond, particularly Birkin's practice of paying tribute, keeping his memory alive, and effectively valorising their relationship and his legacy. Press coverage also represents Gainsbourg's relationship with two of his children, Charlotte and Lulu, particularly Charlotte, given her international career as a film actor. Charlotte's associated with a challenging, unusual upbringing, the successful reputations of her parents, but also the modesty that they instilled within her. And while Gainsbourg's musician son Lulu is less known to British audience, perhaps, he similarly expresses a positive image of Gainsbourg in interview, and I quote, "Definitely a great dad, so sweet, loving." While coverage recounts the controversy in France surrounding the release of Charlotte Gainsbourg's duet with her father, Lemon Incest, she explains to Anglophone readers in a 2010 interview that the lyrics are, and I quote, "a provocative statement, but ultimately innocent, although it might seem weird to say so." Both Charlotte and Lucien emphasise Gainsbourg's playful approach to the song, which for Lucien is possibly indicative of Franco-British cultural differences. Press coverage focuses on Gainsbourg's relationship with France Gall and her winning Eurovision performance, viewed as Poupée de cire, Poupée de sang, viewed as innovative where Eurovision entries of the time are concerned. Coverage also includes reference to the controversy surrounding the song Les Sucettes, described in The Sun in 2018 as a sexually suggestive song about lollipops and elsewhere as causing the end of Gall's working partnership with Gainsbourg. On occasion, British press coverage raises questions about the significance of the controversy surrounding Les Sucettes in terms of the negative effects on Gall and within the context of current public debates regarding, for example, the hashtag #MeToo movement, and growing awareness around child sexual abuse in the aftermath of the Savile case in the UK. So to finish with briefly, and just to try and draw these four examples together, as I mentioned earlier, media coverage of posthumous celebrity probes the past life and generates new meaning in an ongoing process. It perpetuates particular views of the living persona and combines contestation and consensus around several areas. And these can include death and the departed, grief, mourning and memorialization, initial and longer-term ongoing approaches to coverage of particular individuals, celebrity, stardom, iconization, selection, canonization, pantheonization, the issue of selection, but also of omission, the psychology of nostalgia, the construction of individual and personal identities, as well as collective, social, cultural, and political identities relating, for example, to class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, the nation. Where intercultural perspectives of Gainsbourg are concerned, British coverage serves not only to provide Anglophone viewers with insights into and views on the musician, his life and his work, but also contribute towards generating social, cultural and sexual debates of domestic relevance. And following on from these projects, future research could usefully account, for instance, for the significance of particular media forms, media genres and media formats, the role of individual journalists, presenters, interviewers and interviewees, and ethical developments in contemporary journalism. But I'll leave it there for now, and really just to say again, thank you so much for attending tonight, and I look forward to the discussion. And just to let you have, there's a couple of publications on which some of the presentation is based. But thank you again.
Thank you so much, Chris, for such a rich and engaging lecture this evening. I love a bit of Dalida, I have to say. I'm opening it to questions. I think we have a few minutes for questions before we get to our reception. Yes. Oh, yes, there's a microphone coming around.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your paper. I wondered, have you come across at any point, I guess, like self-curation of someone's legacy? So, of course, you mentioned Hallyday and his kind of cancer battle, his decision to go public. Are you aware of situations in which the kind of celebrity tries to shape their posthumous legacy in any active way? If you see what I mean, like an intrusion of the living persona into the nostalgic response?
In the French context, I can't say. I don't know if anything comes to mind. And if that was the case, if that were to be the case, it would it be? I mean, how visible would it be? Or transparent? Often it might be something that's, I mean, perhaps in other contexts as well, is referred to after the death, but not perhaps. But if anyone has any interesting examples, so that would be interesting to discuss. But actually. Yes, so just to say one thing. I mean, it's going back in time, but when, as Penny mentioned a long time ago, I did some work on Brel. So if I think about Brel, actually, so in fact during the period of the 70s, Brel, in fact at the end of the 60s, if I recall correctly, Brel finished performing on stage and moved to the Marquise Islands. But so towards the end of the 70s and just before his death, he did record one final album, which generated one thing was the sales before apparently were so huge before, you know, so even before the release of the album, and my understanding as well that he was dealing with illness at that time, and physical illness as well, and so, but again, that is that might have been recounted after his death, but at the time I'm not aware of what. So that's something, if that's helpful.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I wondered, perhaps less so Gainsbourg, but Dalida, Johnny Hallyday, Coluche, do you think there's any significance to the fact that there'd be a sense that they died before their time, that they didn't get to grow old, so they get fixed in time in a certain way?
Yes, I suppose in the examples I mentioned in the Anglophone context would tie in with that as well. And in fact, and the coverage will refer back to the events surrounding a particular death, and particularly where the circumstances are under discussion, continue to be under discussion as well, and as you say, at a relatively young age as well. But was there anything else beyond that you wanted to?
No, I just wondered if there were, you found kind of commonalities in the way that they might have been understood after their death, or the sorts of coverage that there was. Yeah,
I suppose because there's also around the same time there's Daniel Balavoine as well, and I think I was going to mention as well, relatively young at the time, 1992 I think around, was Michel Berger as well, and in all cases, so there is the extra dimension of the as what's presented as a relatively young age, but in terms of the representations and the media discourse, I think that would be something we'd actually have to look at as a separate strand.
Hi, thanks, Chris. I was thinking about, I guess it's a question about gender, and I was thinking about, I guess particularly about masculinities, and whether, I mean, I noticed the sample skews very much towards the side of men. I did wonder, like Julie, whether women, in order to be eligible for this kind of celebrity, need to die tragically young, like sort of Diana and Dalida. But my question was more about masculinities and whether, in fact, this kind of veneration of the celebrity, this particular celebrity status, is also about a certain kind of masculinity, whether you have to embody a certain kind of masculinity in order to be in this particular kind of pantheon, and whether it's also male fans who are in some sense driving this, because that would also perhaps be relevant to the Dalida example, I suppose, in terms of the following among gay men in particular. But I don't know if you have any thoughts around those sorts of themes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about masculinities, but actually, because of your earlier remark, I'm just thinking about, because one, just to try and, this is a limited, obviously, collection, and give, which has come out of a longer research trajectory looking at other aspects of these artists. But one thing would be to say, and you talked about the balance or imbalance there, would be to think about, for example, someone like Josephine Baker and the pantheonization, their official state, pantheonization, that process. I think that would be an interesting. I was reading a piece in The Conversation about it the other day. That would be an interesting counterpoint, perhaps. But in terms of the masculine, are you in the impression of fairly, in terms of the fairly traditional tropes of masculinity that are represented there? Anything? I mean, did you?
I don't know. It just seems to me they're all quite kind of. There's a certain kind of. They're all quite sort of. All of their images are quite kind of blokey, male, populaire, kind of. Bikers. Kind of. It's a very kind of particular kinds of masculinity that are being kind of venerated.
And it'd be interesting to see if those are reappropriated by subsequent generations, whilst at the same time there's generally a plurality towards, representation of masculinity in the contemporary era.
Yeah, that's interesting. Will that shift? Yeah.
And then, sorry, I thought there was another. No.
I think I'm going to move us to the reception.
Okay.
I think there'll be an opportunity to talk to you and thank you once again, because I think we've delayed you enough, in a sense. And getting on to the reception, which would be all very welcome to attend. So thank you very much indeed for your lecture, and thank you for attending. Thank you.